Everyone who finds their way in poker eventually finds it their way, not anybody else's. You gain so much more knowledge by being willing to feel experience as it comes to you. I never would have guessed I would have gotten so much from poker, and none of it was financial. The biggest thing that people feel like is being threatened when they're playing poker is their sense of self-worth.
Today's guest on the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast is high-performance expert and coach, Jared Alderman. Jared's a longtime student of one of the best heads-up poker players in the entire universe, Kevin Rabichow. He's a past CPG guest. Jared has battled up to 2K No Limit on Ignition and Bovada, despite never reviewing any of his hands. We'll get into more of that in the podcast. He has a very unorthodox way of making his decisions, of thinking and performing at the highest levels of online poker cash games. Quite frankly, just a brilliant poker mind who's exceptionally passionate. You can feel the passion in the way that he talks about performance and the way the mind works as it relates to playing poker. He's going to drop a multitude of greatness bombs. And so without any further ado, I bring to you mindset and performance expert, former high-stakes online poker pro, Jared Alderman. Mr. Alderman, welcome to Chasing Poker Greatness. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. As I tend to do on this show to get the party started, want to know about your story, your journey through the world of poker. How'd that come about?
I guess it depends on how far back you want to start.
The beginning, man. That's the best
beginning.
place.
Yeah, I mean, I was into poker, as a kid, like always kind of enjoyed it. And man, I haven't told the story in some time, but I actually kind of first had my foray into like professional gambling in the world of blackjack. So before I was turning 21, I got really into blackjack, got really into counting cards. And I was like very much a casual poker player at the time. Like before I was 21, so I was playing with friends and stuff like that. And then through card counting and just being in casinos a lot, I was just exposed to poker way more and more. Started playing more and more live poker. Eventually, it was live, and then I moved down to Florida. I was in the Navy at the time, but I moved down to Florida and started playing the live games there. Got invited to like some bigger private live games just because I'm a sociable, fun guy at the tables.
Yeah.
And my experience at the private live games made me very convinced I was like the best poker player on earth. Like I was just like I'm the best, I'm the greatest. Like this is
unstoppable machine. Yeah.
Unstoppable. Like and I knew all of my poker knowledge was very much just through experience. Like I didn't really know anything about poker at the time.
What year?
And then
this?
just let's see, this was 2018.
Oh wow. So in the pretty current.
Yeah, pretty current. So solvers were like on the scene right around then. Like they were becoming bigger, but I still knew nothing about them. But because of this experience live, I was just like, I'm going to take this to the online streets. Like I'm the best. Like, why wouldn't I?
Easy transition. Yeah.
Yeah. So I switched and like immediately jumped into like 200 NL and just got annihilated like time after time after time after time.
Mm-hmm.
Slowly started picking up books. I remember the book that like really put me on a totally different trajectory was, man, who's that guy who wrote these big books, but he wrote one called I can't remember it now. It's like advanced poker, like something about GTO. I can't remember. It was the first introduction to GTO, and there's like this concept that like there's like theoretically optimal play. It wasn't Janda. It was a guy who usually wrote for like a wider audience. He has those white covers with like the green images. Does that ring a bell? Like he always has white covers and green images. Anyway, I'd have to find. I can't hear. That's crazy. I can't even remember it now. Yeah, it was Ned Miller book. It was a Ned Miller book. Yeah, cool. Yeah. But then I just like through getting obsessed with that, like I kind of have like that just like sparked this whole world. I downloaded. I remember buying like the elite version of Pile Solver. I went out and spent as much as I could on like the most expensive computer as I could, and just like put together my own little machine and was just running Sims constantly. got a lot of theoretical knowledge, and I was basically like barely keeping my head above water still at 200 NL because there was a big executional gap in myself, in my ability to like know and execute. Um, and it took me a long time to bridge that gap, like a really long time to realize that like when I was playing, I wasn't really playing. Like I was just in my head trying to like puzzle match based on the solutions I had seen. Like I'm not playing poker at all.
Yeah.
And so making
You had
yeah,
outsourced your strategic map to something
yeah,
else, and we're trying to
yeah,
recall that information in game without kind of thinking yourself, right?
yeah, yeah. And there was a big moment actually. I had various coaches, but there was a big moment when I had hired actually Kevin Rabichow as my personal coach, where we were working through something. I was working through trying to move through some of the mid-high stakes, like 1K on ACR and stuff like that, and doing some population analysis on like leaks. And there's a big moment where we were looking at a leak in some of the regs at the stakes I was playing at, where they were like, when they were betting in 3-bet pots, when they were betting larger sizes, it was just underbluffed when they were like out of position. And I just remember having a conversation with Kevin, like where he was like, they're just underfolding to this massively. So like, we should just never bluff raise here, and we should just bluff raise with value a lot. And I remember asking him like, yeah, but what do we do on the turn when like we only have nuts and we get like re-raised or something when the flush comes in or something like that? And he was just like, yeah, that's a rough problem, but that's just what playing poker is, like figuring that out then,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
that clicked a ton for me of like, we're playing a strategic game. Like somehow like it just like reconfigured my mind. And
Mhm.
in that one coaching session, I mark as like the turning point for my like being able to actually play and succeed at like higher stakes games. Um, and yeah, so then I started playing higher
What
stakes
did
there
you
eventually.
What'd you do with
Yeah.
that? That information after the turning point coaching session. Like, what were the next steps?
The big turning point was just, I'm just going to not be afraid of uncomfortable spots. Like, I'm not going to be afraid of getting in spots where, like, I'm not sure what the answer is. That was, like, the big takeaway.
Mm.
And my play from that just became far more experimental and playful and exploratory. Like, my play was actively running experiments on what I think is good and just seeing what happens. And honestly, it wasn't even a ton about that particular leak. Like, I was still doing this kind of analysis of, my opposition and stuff, but it was the real turning point was just like, there aren't rules here. Like, there aren't rules. You're just playing a game. You're playing a strategic game. And you're playing a strategic game against people. And what I thought I was very good at that when I was playing live. And I kind of just killed that part of myself once I discovered solvers. And it really reinvigorated my whole self, if you will, coming to the game and playing. The game became so much more rewarding and so much more fun. And yeah, and so then I became became much easier to move up and play higher stakes at that point. Like, and then I eventually would find my home among 2K Iggy online, and that was where I was playing mostly until I eventually decided to not play anymore.
How was that experience? Moving to the highest stakes, at least on Ignition, after struggling for a while at 10x smaller stakes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, like it was some of the most fun I've ever had playing poker. Like when I was playing at that stakes, I was the most relaxed. It was so rewarding. Like it was very rewarding. I struggled for years, going from like, it took me to probably to like, let's say, I don't know. It took me 3 years, but putting in a lot of volume, a lot of time, a lot of effort. Maybe it was longer than that, of just like really struggling. And to like have that moment where it's just like things switched and the game was like fun again and like not so effortful and so contracted. And yet I was playing way higher than I had been before. I really hadn't conceived that as a possibility, like earlier when I switched to online. Like I really hadn't thought that would be a world I could be in, that I could be playing these stakes and it could be just I could feel so free and like just playing how I want to and like relaxed. And I would upon self-reflection, come to realize that those two connecting was not a coincidence. That's a big part of playing your best, obviously, is playing in a way that you feel free. And that's what eventually led me to doing what I do now, which with poker players, which is what I call performance coaching, which is much more working on the meta, like relatability, like how are you playing, less like what strategy are you playing,
Yeah. How do you feel?
Yeah.
Presence, the Jason Su
Oh
arena
yeah.
of
Yeah.
playing, performing at a high level. I think it's really interesting that you kind of unshackled yourself and gave yourself the permission to play more freely and do things that made sense or felt right. And then your results consequently started taking off after that. It's something that, I deal with all the time. And, to kind of frame it, I think a lot of people, something that's not intuitive is that if you're playing rock, paper, scissors, right, the GTO output, the optimal solution to not be exploitable is to randomize, rock, paper, scissors, 1/3 for each of them. The thing that I think is less intuitive is that if, say, you're playing against somebody and they throw paper 34% of the time, well, the maximum exploit is not to throw a little bit of scissors. The maximum exploit is to throw all scissors, like every single time scissors. Now, the reason that I bring this up is that when it comes to exploits, like there are hard protocols that you can develop where it's like, like they're just doing this, throw scissors every single time and you'll be good. But what I find is that you're playing a game against human beings. And if somebody throws scissors 30 or throws paper 34% of the time, and then I throw scissors 20 times in a row, guess what? They're going to stop throwing paper as much, and they're probably going to start throwing more rock. And so you always have to make these kind of meta adjustments and do what feels good based on the specificity of the situation, based on, meta playing against your opponents. And I think that's something that was a big aha moment for me as I was, training and building the Wolves, my CFP was hard protocols, whether they're exploits derived from data or whether they're derived from a solver, they can really hinder you. They can really hold you back. They can stop you from feeling like they just turn your brain off to where you're not thinking. And then all of a sudden you're wondering, why is everything going wrong? Well, everything's going wrong because you're not dynamic in your thought process. You're not, you're not giving yourself the freedom to do what you think is the best thing, which ultimately I think drives the highest win rate.
Yeah, 100%. And it's the dynamism of this can be highlighted by this metaphor you brought up, which is if they're throwing rock 34% of the time, you should throw paper 100%, but then they might adjust. But you also have these examples where they're throwing rock 40% of the time, and then they see you throwing paper 100%, and they're like, oh, I'm going to do this less, and they're still doing it 35% of the time, right? So you have all of these examples where it's the how dynamic the game is really can't be understated. You have these examples where it's no, but you can just keep, because I run into this, when I used to coach poker strategy, and I would run into pushbacks from all sides, and you really have to be able to hold all of it equally. Yes, it can be the case that they can adjust. It can also be the case that they're so out of line that their adjustments are irrelevant. But the other thing that I think is worth highlighting for players who are playing a game is solvers have conditioned us to, and solvers and concepts like EV and all these terms within poker have conditioned us to believe in our strategy in the long run. And they forget that you're playing a game now. And so when you're playing this hand now, one of the things I used to always tell my students was, remember your opponent's strategy is fixed. In this moment, their strategy is fixed. It doesn't matter. Yes, they can adapt, but you're making a decision now. You're playing against a human being, and solvers are iterating over time, but among the iteration, you have all kinds of adjusting periods, and they're just constantly counter exploiting each other. And it's right now when you're deciding should I run this bluff? If it's out of line and they can adjust, that's irrelevant to the fact of if it's profitable right now in this hand, And I think a lot of thoughts around the long-term viability of a strategy leave people not taking profitable lines that are profitable in this moment. But it's you always have the ability to adapt. You can run this line and just decide next time you're done running it, or you can run it 5 times and 3 out of those 5 could have been profitable and 2 out of 5 can stop being, and you can notice in those 2 out of 5 and you still made a profitable strategy adjustment overall. And this game is it's dynamic, and you really have to be playing in the moment and playing in this hand and playing at this time. And
one thing that my partner in Wolves and co-host on Tactical Tuesday, John, does exceptionally well, that I've always thought was very, very clever, and it made me wonder why other people didn't try this. But he would go for essentially he would go through these experimental phases where he's only going to say bluff on the river if the flop and turn check through, like IP 2-bet pot PFR. So like he's not going to bet like any low equity hand, just going to check the flop, check the turn, and then bet the river, right? So he does this for like a month, right? And he gets some takeaways. The first one is don't do that. It's not there are way better ways to structure your bluffs, right? But the second was he started figuring out after getting enough reps when it was good to check the flop and check the turn and go for that line, right? He started figuring out because he just had so many reps. Like he basically forced through so many reps of this one line that he realized like, oh, I have this tool. It's got utility. Now I have a better idea of when to use it. And that is something that like I just don't see many people do is like I'm always going to go stop and go on the flop or stop and go when I'm IP 2-bet pot PFR and just do it like for a month and see, right? Like, or like he forced himself to bet the river, even when he felt like this is not getting through. I don't think this is going to work out well. He forced himself to do it to basically learn like the scenarios when it was good. And I think that, you can get away with a lot in poker. And the thing that like I love about the game is there's always this experimentation, especially in a game that's no limit Texas Hold'em. There are so many possibilities, right? I can't tell you definitively if opening 10x pre-flop outperforms opening 2 big blinds on the button. I can't because I've never tried it. I don't have the data. I've never experimented with it, right? And that to me is just like a very beautiful thing. And I'm always wary of like the folks that have all the answers but don't really ask many questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, it got what kind of gets highlighted there for me is this idea that like we are a process and this game is a process, and how much are you treating this as a process as opposed to discrete moments where you're getting things right or wrong. And like what the attitude of experimentation does is it tells you that you're in process, and like the process can be rewarding and can be profitable, while in the interim it doesn't seem to be so. Like the knowledge you gain, for example, running an experimentation like that over the course of a month can be so valuable. And like I remember when I used to coach poker students, there were so many times where like I would be like, well, why didn't you bluff here? And there's so many players who don't know when bluffing works because they're not willing to get it wrong enough. Like you're not willing to get, and if you view yourself as each decision is a test, and the consequences of that test is like if I'm a good poker player or not, then depending on your particular predilections, like you might way under bluff because the cost of getting it wrong feels too emotionally bad for you. But if you just recognize that this is just a process, like this isn't a test, each hand, like you can make negative EV plays that can turn into positive EV plays because of what you learn from it. And being willing to get out there and try things. And that's really the thing is people just don't trust themselves. Now that I do like more mental and performance coaching, I run into this all the time where you're talking to somebody about like, hey, just do whatever feels right to you. And people are like, then I will lose so much money. And it's like, no, you won't. Like you might a little bit, but you actually don't you haven't done this enough to even know that you're not as crazy as you think you are. Like you think you need all of these parameters and boundaries, but you intuitively want to make money. Like you intuitively want to do things. You're not just going to get out there and always punt it. But even the times where you do, you learn an awful lot. And I'm just the kind of player that loves to bluff. So I have ran more bad bluffs than many players have even tried. And,
Sure.
And so I just but because of that, I have a way better sense of where bluffs are getting through than I have found a lot of players.
And guess what? You also have a way better sense of how to maximize value because you understand bluffing at a very high level, right? Those two are directly related. Where like, oh, in this spot, bluffing would be atrocious, but I have value. So guess what? I'm going to maximize my value here because I don't think my bluff would ever get through. So they're just, it's all like we're human beings. So I think we think in binary, or we respond to things in a very binary way of like, oh, my bluff got called so bad. When it's like, yeah, like, dude, you can bet pot on the river, and if it gets through 60% of the time, you're doing well. But that means 40% of the time you're going to lose. And sometimes that 40% can be like 5 times in a row or 6 times in a row you lose. And you're like, wow, I'm torching money in this spot. when you're actually not. And I think, your brain, your body, your emotions can really play some pretty dastardly tricks on us, and make us more risk averse.
Yeah, I mean, you're funny you say this. This is like very much in what I like to work with people on because I actually think we're not as binary as we think we are. I think,
Really?
yeah, I think culture and Western civilization have conditioned us to be far more black and white about reality than our brains incline themselves to. I think if you go, there's when you get into a culture where it's very individualistic and it's very much like again, everything you do is a measure of you as a person. The stakes get raised so high that you're now in a state of your mind that the stakes are so high that this actually breaks down like neuroscientifically across the hemispheres. Like your hemispheres operate in these very different ways. And when you get into this heightened state of like risk, where the consequences are really high, where the status-based consequences are really high because making bad status decisions means like your community, your tribe can kick you out. And when you feel all of this pressure in a moment to like do the good thing, to appear like a good poker player, those risks are so high that now you get put into a very binary state of this was good or this was bad. I think there's a very natural tendency of mind, though, that you can tap into to view things more in flow, to view things more as what they are. This is what Jason Su will talk a lot about with presence. Jason's a good friend, and he and I view a lot of this stuff very similarly. My background is I have sat many silent meditation retreats and studied a lot of Buddhist psychology and done a lot of meditation. And my inclination is that actually it is far more natural for your minds to allow things to be what they are and to not label them so much so. And we start labeling things when we have this increased desire to control things because the stakes are so high. And in order to control things, you kind of have to put these boxes around things and create these clear concepts of like right or wrong, good or bad. And that gives your left hemisphere, which is a part of your brain that you use for control, this ability to apprehend things, to grab things. That's why we're right-handed. It's because most people are right-handed because their left hemispheres control things and grasp. But your right hemisphere is actually much more equipped at comprehending the world, at taking in data, allowing things to be what they are. But when we're trying to control things a lot, then we get into this very binary state of mind that is very damaging for improvement.
And how do you help people kind of break out of that as poker players?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is practice. It's tapping back into, Greek philosophers used to speak to our negative capacity, they would call it, or like our capacity to do less. And that's really the thing. We're so much, and again, this is like a Western culture thing that's really bad in poker, but we believe so much of our ability to do better is about doing more. It's like, I just need to do more. I need to study more. I need to understand. I need to do more. And learning that you have this natural inherent ability to do less, to just sort of rest back and like take things in and like not label things, not call things something. There's actually like a training in this where you can learn to be present, learn to be grounded in the moment and to notice the nature of your mind, notice the way your thoughts are doing things. The way I teach this is through meditation. I would, consider what Jason teaches to be a kind of meditation, just he doesn't call it that, but it's being embodied, feeling what's happening in your body as what it is, feeling what's the information without labeling it. And that you can learn to kind of relax this results-based, not just results-based, but this inclination to label things. That's really what it is. Like, that's why you're saying this was bad, this was good. It's because I feel like I have to call this something, I have to make it something. But to learn really to just be able to relax as a skill, to just like, you're safe, you're not in danger. The biggest thing that people feel like is being threatened when they're playing poker is their sense of self-worth, their sense of value. And to be able to find a stable sense of self-worth outside of the game, Jason will talk a lot about like learning to love yourself. And I do this a lot with players as well, but this is a big part of it. Learning to accept yourself as you are, learning to show up as you, play as you, not play as you should, not play as you believe you've been told to, but be you, I think is one of the most important things in learning to relax and find ease and be yourself.
Man, I love that. It brings to mind a few things. The first is that I haven't done it lately, and I should. I feel like I need to. But the days where I do nothing, like an unplugged day, where I just don't check my phone, I don't go on the computer, I stay away from electronics, um, are some of the most high value days of my
Yeah.
existence, where I just feel like a better person. I just feel better.
Yeah.
I have more energy. I feel more disconnected. And it really sets the stage for the next day. Like I just feel re-energized and rejuvenated, ready to go. Another thing was I did an experiment that kind of kept going on for like a year. That is, it felt embarrassing at the time. I would track my poker results in a spreadsheet, but I did not keep a database for well over a year, maybe a year and a half or 2 years. This did not do me any favors in the coaching realm of being able to like show somebody a graph or show somebody my results over time. I think that time I was like a run at once coach, or a little while later I was, and I didn't have those kind of results to show them.
Yeah.
But I absolutely smashed that year, and it felt so relaxing and so freeing that I wasn't obsessing over analyzing my data on a daily basis, uploading my hand, seeing if I got bluffed because it's on ignition and you can see the whole cards afterwards, just analyzing everything that's going on, looking at just how I'm doing when I'm c-betting, how I'm doing when I'm not c-betting. I just kind of let all of that go, showed up every day to play poker and played freely, and had phenomenal results. I can't tell you how many big blinds per 100 I was running at because I didn't collect any of the data. But I'm glad you said that. It did remind me of that. And it honestly did feel a lot more freeing when I wasn't obsessing over my red line. I wasn't obsessing over my river call efficiency. I wasn't obsessing over those types of things.
Yeah, and what you're pointing to here is how we set this sort of standards for what it means to be good enough, right? Like, and you know, when you take an unplugged day and you're saying like, I'm not going to do anything today, what you've basically done is say, I'm not going to have a definition of what it means to live my life today, right? Like, I'm not going to have a definition of each moment of today doing nothing. I have decided I will let be a part of my life, right? Each moment is going to belong here. I'm going to belong doing this. And as you raise the bar, though, as you say, oh, I really want to get these things done today, now every moment that's not doing those things feels like an impediment to your life, right? It feels like it's getting in the way of what you have decided is my life. And this translates to poker, right? As you raise the bar of what it means to be a poker player, which poker player, and this is the thing most poker players forget, takes place in the context of your life. It is not your life. Poker takes place in the context of your life. And that's one of the big things I always want to remind people, because as you raise the bar of what it means to be a poker player, and if you have raised the bar of your life as being a poker player, there's a lot of ways to now feel like these moments don't belong, and that things are not quite the way they should be. And that's a lot of stress for your brain to go through. Two things that I did when I was playing that were very controversial to many poker players I knew is I never reviewed my hands, and I didn't have a HUD. I just didn't do hand review, and I never had a HUD. It was just like not a part of my life. And I knew my particular nervous system was so sensitive. You know, I teach so much of this stuff because I, in many cases, am the worst at all of this. And
which is
my
how
nervous
it is
system
in life, right?
Yeah. But like, I knew my nervous system was so sensitive to feeling like I had just not done enough, and that like I need to do more, that even touching a hand review immediately would cause me to spiral into I'm bad. I need to do more. And so I just stayed away from it. I just trusted my nervous system and just like, this is just not good for me. Same thing with a HUD. I was just too collapsed around the data and trying to make use of that data that oftentimes I made worse use of it. Right. And so I just listened to the way that I responded and cut those things out. And again, my poker play incredibly improved. And that's the big thing, is learning to feel like you belong while playing cannot be overstated, the value of that. Like learning to feel like who you are belongs. And there's this conflict between fitting in and belonging, where fitting in is us trying to conform ourselves to be a part of a group, right? Like, I'm a poker player. Poker players play like this. They do things like this. They play in this way. Belonging is you showing up as you and feeling like that's okay. And for me, knowing myself and getting to know my nervous system, the way I reacted, I knew hand review and HUDs were just not the move. which is not the ways I was going to find success. For so long, I was so fixated on fitting in that I just kept doing these things that were wreaking havoc in my mental life because I thought this is what poker players did. They had HUDs, they did hand reviews, they did these things. For some reason, I loved data analysis, like big data analysis. That was exciting, invigorating, and it could filter into my game in a natural way. And so I did a lot of that. But yeah, no real HUDing and stuff. And yeah, everyone who finds their way in poker eventually finds it their way, not anybody else's, you know?
Yeah. And, you're saying a lot of things that resonate very, very, very deeply. I mentioned hard protocols earlier. And one thing that came from that was, the players were bluffing in like a certain way and generally in certain spots. And, they would bring a hand and ask me my opinion on the hand. And they're like, well, the strat is to bet 30% and then 70% and then bet the river. And I'm like, yeah, but I wouldn't like I over to like, I would never bet here. I know that's what like the strategy is telling you to do, but I would never do that here. And like, here's why, it just feels bad to me. And I think like there's really something that kind of happened in the early days of online poker. When I'm 40 now, so I've been playing for a long time since I was 20 years old. And in the beginning, there were no HUDs. In the beginning, there were no solvers. There was very limited database work. And so it was thinking about the game and doing what you felt was best and following your intuition. And so like I built up that muscle over time in those days to where it was like, yeah, I don't care what anybody says. I'm never bluffing here because bluffing feels absolutely terrible and you can't convince me otherwise. And I just wouldn't do it. And so that was the thing that we had to train into the players was like, listening to your intuition and trusting it and not bluffing in a spot where you normally would. It also gives you responsibility too, right? Like you have to take responsibility for your actions, which I think is another downfall of like, solvers and hard protocols is that like you do something, you're like, well, it's solver approved, so I did it, right? And you realize that like you don't realize you're protecting your ego and you're protecting yourself because it's hard for somebody to say, well, I hate that bluff. I think it's atrocious when you're like, oh, here's this map that tells me that it's a good spot to bluff. So like what can you say to contradict it, right? And we just don't take responsibility for our bad decisions where it's like, dude, they're not folding here. Like I can promise you this dude is not folding here. And it's just, it ultimately just becomes kind of an excuse in the same way that I think people use variance as an excuse to not take responsibility for their decision-making as well.
Yeah. And, there's a couple useful distinctions I think that can be characterized here. Like when you're talking about the protocols and you're talking about this feels wrong, what you're really distinguishing between here is what's called linearized problem solving and parallel problem solving. And so linearized problem solving, again, is very left hemispheric and it's very sequential. It's this step, then this step, then this step, then this step. It's very explicit. So basically any math problem can be solved linearly, right? It's just, you just do these steps on any math problem, you will get an answer. But the left hemisphere is very good at that. It's very good at linearized problem solving and just like get to the answer. The right hemisphere does what's called parallel problem solving. And so if you actually look at the neurons across the different hemispheres, the left hemisphere has a lot more neurons, but their connections are very short, literally physically, their connections are very short. The right hemisphere has fewer, their connections go the entire length of the hemisphere. They're way more deeply interconnected. And so when you're processing in this sense of when you're saying this feels wrong, what's actually happening is a global parallel problem-solving process is unfolding, which you're taking in all this information at the same time and just getting an answer. And that answer is a feeling.
Yeah.
That answer is just, this doesn't feel right. And you can't put more to it because anytime you try to conceptualize it, you start tapping into this linear stuff where it's like, well, it's this, it's this, it's this, right? But when things all arise at once, and any creative process is a parallel process, right? Any creative thing is like it all coming together at once. And there's these really distinct, I could go on and on about the hemispheres. I find the differences between them fascinating, and especially how it results to problem solving. Yeah. But like there's this fascinating difference between them where the right hemisphere, there's these studies where they either take hemispheric stroke patients or they take patients who have entire hemispheres, a process called hemi-neglect happening where their hemisphere is not working, and they just look at how they look at the world differently. And people who only have access to the left hemisphere ignore at all costs contradictory information. They just ignore it. The left hemisphere wants to preserve the model at all costs. That's all it cares about. The
What's
right
what's a
hemisphere.
practical example of
I mean, there's lots of practical examples of this. So so if you don't have access to your right hemisphere, your left arm doesn't work. Okay, your right hemisphere controls your left arm.
All right.
If I tell someone with this condition called hemi-neglect to pick up a tray of drinks, right, just a tray of drinks, if you know your left arm doesn't work, you will pick it up from the center, right? Like you'll kind of put your hand under it and pick it up from the center. If you don't know, which is what happens to them, they just grab it with their right arm and go to pick it up, and all the drinks pour off. They believe their right arm works. The left hemisphere is very bad at taking in new information. It just rejects it. What's interesting is that when you ask them, why did you do that? They will just make up a reason. They will just say, oh, I forgot, or like, oh, I wanted to dump the drinks on the ground, or like they just come up with reasons. They just come up with explanations for it. So there's tons of examples of this where you can just ask them to do things. So you can show them information that only one hemisphere sees, like the left hemisphere sees. Ask them to pick something up, but they're not processing it because the left hemisphere only sees like words. You can show them a picture, and so they'll pick it up, and you'll be like, "Why did you pick that up?" And they just make something up. They just like make up reasons. The right hemisphere, though, takes inconsistent information very seriously. When there's an incompatible piece of information to its model, the felt sense of this is curiosity. The felt sense of this is, oh, interesting. This is not what I expected. Right? So, and this is why you can take two poker players, show them a bet size in a spot that they don't expect, and you can see who uses their left and right hemisphere more by if you're met with rage or if you're met with curiosity.
Yeah.
Right. The poker players who just, this is wrong, this is bad, you shouldn't do this. Right. They just can't take in this new piece of information and make sense of it. Whereas people who just respond with, why are we seeing this? Why is this what I'm seeing? This is your right hemisphere globally processing stuff and saying, oh, there's a missing piece here. And how do we make this picture fit? How do we make this whole picture of things fit with this inconsistent piece of information? And this is hugely important for making great decisions at poker. The problem is we in the West in particular, but in poker especially, we have learned to elevate explicit linear logic as king. We have learned to say, if you cannot explain it, if it's not explicit, and if it's not step by step, it's bullshit. And so people don't like this. They don't like talking to somebody when they say, well, why did you do this? And you say, it felt right. Like, it felt right. I don't have more for you. It felt right. And I can, in hindsight, maybe give you explanations as to why I think it's good. But the truest, most honest answer is in that moment, it felt right. And that is actually more creative, a deeper way of playing than having these explicit processes that we can just explain.
Man, I love that. It brings to mind, watching Phil Galfond in the Galfond Challenge, playing heads up against Perkins on Twitch, and him, going through his thought process, and the amount of times he just said, "I don't know." Oh, that's odd. That's interesting. I don't know. Yeah. Right? Like, it was very, very clear that like that was a part of how he operates. Where it wasn't like he didn't have all the answers, he didn't know all the answers, and he was acknowledging that and very comfortable in acknowledging that as well. Which, yeah, always stood out to me. And there's, I think so many examples of hands that I've played historically where something will happen and that thought, that's weird, that's odd. Like, what does that mean? Or I just get this feeling of like, betting does not feel right here. I don't know why. Yeah. It just feels not right. A hand I played a while ago was like, I called 4-bet queens, small blind called, and they checked. I flopped an overpair on like 9-10 deuce or something, and I checked behind. And I was like, my wolves were like, why did you check behind? And I'm like, I don't know. It felt right to check behind. And then like we looked it up combinatorically. And the amount of times that like they slow play aces and they slow play kings in that
Yeah.
spot, as well as them having nines and tens and realizing like, oh, like combinatorically speaking, I'm not actually pushing a ton of equity when I bet here because I'm trying to stack jacks and tens, and jacks and
Yeah.
tens doesn't get stacked on an absolute basis. So like, in kind of like after the fact, investigating why I checked behind and kind of looking at it through the logic,
Yeah.
through the lens of logic and math, was like, oh, like I could actually see this, but like there's no way. I don't know how to articulate it other than
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
moment, betting felt not right. And like
Right.
that's a tough thing for coming from a coach when they're like, why didn't you bet
But
here? And I'm like, I don't know. It felt wrong.
yeah, I mean, it's just huge though, because like what's happening when you're playing poker is you're processing so much information to distill it down to explicit ideas. You're really cheapening what you know. Like you're reducing down, like there's this term, people who study like this in neuroscience, they use this term, the limit case. Like language is the limit case of the actual thing, which means it is the least representative thing of the thing. It is as far as we can get from the thing and still kind of be talking about it. When I say a table, I'm not talking about the full experience of a table. I'm actually as far from that experience as possible so that I can communicate to you.
Yeah.
Right? If I say my table, you haven't a fucking clue what I'm talking about.
Right. I
You know?
imagine a table, but
right.
who knows?
You haven't a
Right.
clue.
Yeah.
And so when you're playing poker, like you just gave up some combinatoric ideas, but it's more than that. You're seeing timing, you're seeing behavior. You have experience with these players. You have experience with other players. You have the way you've been playing and modeling their minds and how these interact. You have all of the knowledge that you're happening. It's all
The other
coming together in
opponents.
this mishmash.
Yeah.
Other opponents, like you just have so much going on that like to which is why I started working with players, like more advanced players, I guess you'll say. I don't know why that's more advanced players. I'm not even going to put quotations around it. Where the thing that I'm working with them on is not a thought process, but what I call an attention process, which is not let's think explicit things, but let's train our attention to pay attention to the things that matter in the moments that it matters. Because that is so much more important than having a thought process, which is really this distilled, when you're paying attention, you're collecting data. And to be collecting data at the right times, at the right moments when playing poker makes a big difference. To like think the right things, you're not going to, like if you have a question, like do they have bluffs? Well, if you haven't been paying attention to the right things, including in your own experience in this moment, but also the rest of the hand, you're going to come up with totally different answers to that question. So like having that thought process is useless to you. Like it just doesn't matter. But if you can be, one of the things I say a lot is like attention is our most basic resource. Every moment using your attention, you're training your mind what matters in this moment. And so one of the interesting things when they study creative people is that moments of creativity, what happens with their attention is it goes from outward to inward. And when they're not in the depths of the creative process, their attention is not inward but outward. And so and this is the opposite for non-creative people. And when I talk with players who are very constricted in the way that they play, their attention is very inward while they're playing. And at important moments, their attention goes outwards for explanations. Why is this happening? What's wrong with them? When in reality, on average, where your attention needs to be is outward, where you're playing in flow, in presence, like in the room, in the space that you're in, collecting data. And then when a big decision happens, now you need to come inward and see, what am I feeling? How am I processing? What's going on here? And like even just that shift in attention in my experience, can change the quality of your decision making massively.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing and makes a lot of sense. It's very super well articulated. I love that.
Yeah.
Tell me, going back to your story, why quit poker? Or I guess not quit, but I don't know. Quit is so final,
Yeah,
right?
I still play a little, so
why,
like I don't really
why
quit.
transition away from
Yeah.
primarily playing poker, essentially?
Yeah, it was more of like a personal decision. Like I found when coaching started kind of taking off, I just found the collaborative process far more rewarding than the competitive process. Like I just liked working with somebody to help make them better. And it was so much more rewarding than work. I liked the competition and I liked playing poker. And I still do it. It's just not like before I was playing it, every single day for hours,
Sure.
And then now I play like once a week, Not even that sometimes, but yeah, I mean, mostly just what was personally rewarding, what I enjoyed doing, where I saw my future going, like, and also as I was just growing as a person, I was realizing how much I was using poker for many of the things I was saying to try to feel good enough to try to find that sense of belonging and value. And the more I just did my own internal work, and I felt that the appeal of poker lessened, and what really was rewarding to me drew my attention more, which is like I've always wanted to work with people,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of how I ended up doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. I'll say that of course does resonate with me, right? After
Yeah.
being a lone wolf for a long time, and that was the primary driver behind starting a CFP was just being of service to a bunch of people that I cared about who are chasing their own poker dreams and doing whatever I can to help them realize their full potential. Was just that collaborative effort, working with people. It's
Yeah.
I love it. And I actually didn't. I played very, very little poker for like 2 years, and I've only recently, over the past few months, started playing poker again on like a regular basis. So I took quite a bit of time off because it's so much more fulfilling helping somebody overcome some challenge or improve in some area of their game that they've historically just been awful at. It's very, very rewarding watching people just overcome those obstacles and challenges.
Yeah, for a lot of poker players too, I think it's worth noting there's this interesting fact about the human brain where it's like you have these two different types of intelligence. You have what's called fluid and crystallized intelligence. And like your fluid intelligence really peaks around your young 20s. And this is kind of your ability to like learn and improve at new skills and like get like to like become your best at a skill.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas your crystallized intelligence, which is really your ability to impart, like utilize all your knowledge and experience and come up with like helpful insights to other people and stuff, this peaks when you're like 70.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a path from playing to coaching, I think is actually, for players to keep this in mind as a potentially very rewarding path, is good because a lot of players will get worse as they get older, and a lot of players struggle with that. Like you peak at a certain point, and then if you envision yourself as being just constantly improving your whole life at poker, it's just unlikely to be true. It can happen. I mean, you have the standouts who just have been at the top of their game for a long time, but it also just meshed with me realizing like I don't want to put so much into this like becoming the best and competitive at this game that I fail to tap into this other super rewarding area of coaching. And I think having that transition more like available to me and start building a coaching business just it's comforting to know that I can get into this. And I now treat coaching as this skill that I'm trying to perfect and get really great at and become really, really good at, and it's rewarding in its own way.
Which of course it is, right? That's
yeah.
Something that I think a lot of outside people don't really recognize is how much skill it is to be a good coach. And it's something that, like last year, I got really heavy into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And
oh yeah, I love BJJ, dude.
Yeah, I still am atrocious. But what I learned, like being a student and just like getting my ass kicked every single day, was, I got to experience BJJ from the perspective of a student, and I had a coach, right? Coach Sam, who's, doing the move of the day and showing how all the technique works and giving advice and, leveraging his coaching skills that he's learned over the last 10 or 15 years. And, I realized like, oh, like it's pretty cool hanging out with another coach. Like I'm learning from the perspective of a student, but also from the perspective of a coach, and taking away the things that I think, wow, that's really good. I never thought about explaining something that way. Like that really resonates. Or, sometimes I'm like, I don't really that didn't land super well. But then like a lot of the things that I say don't land super well either. And I think that's, a part of the learning process. But yeah, I mean, taking these lessons, what coaches have you found to be influential in your career as a coach? Because I think, us coaches try to find mentors or people that can influence us or take lessons from, those of us that have the crystalline, was it crystalline knowledge?
Crystallized intelligence. Yeah.
Crystallized intelligence.
Yeah.
The wise.
So, man. I mean, Kevin Ravitch, I was, as far as a poker coach goes, was like I said, I mentioned him already, but he was incredible. He was an incredible coach. It's funny because I think I maybe had 2 sessions with him, and yet he changed the trajectory of my poker like immensely. So like that just speaks to like how much a good coach I mean, a good coach at the right time in particular too
Yeah,
makes a big
right
difference.
student, right coach. It
Right.
can,
Yeah. Right time. But I still will uh, contend he's one of the best coaches in poker. I think he's incredible. And now he's a good friend now too. So I have to say that. But I'm just kidding. But I mean, honestly, some of the coaches, I guess I wouldn't even say them coaches, but my meditation teachers have been some of the most influential people for me.
Mm.
Learning from the way that they approach teaching what I would argue is the most complex thing you could be teaching somebody, which is how to examine each moment of your life in a clearer, more pristine way. And the way, just the patience and kindness and care that I feel from those teachers, and the true investment in your journey and all of that has really impacted the way I try to coach. I really want people to feel really free to show up exactly where they're at in life when I work with them. And yeah, that's made a really big impact on me. And I continue to, one of the main reasons I do two silent meditation retreats a year. And one of the main reasons I do that is because I find it helps me as a coach to work with the people that I work with so much. And yeah, and I think there's a lot of responsibility when someone comes to you, especially, this is true in all fields, but especially in the field that I'm in, where I'm working with people's minds, their well-being, like they're, these really deep and personal, vulnerable things. Like I just really want to treat that with such deep care and take that really seriously. And so going on retreat, learning from some of these teachers, and yeah, I feel so fortunate to have been able to do it.
That's great, man. Yeah, it feels like a sacred responsibility.
Yeah.
It's very, very serious for the people that really dedicate their lives to coaching and helping and influencing and teaching and learning. Yeah, it feels, there's no greater feeling than seeing somebody overcome, and no worse feeling for me than seeing people that I care about fail, which has of course happened as well many times over my coaching career. And that's, yeah, it's a very painful thing. What would you say has been the most unexpected thing that's come from your journey through the world of poker?
I mean, my personal growth as a human, honestly, is like the most unexpected thing for me. Like if I look back at who I was when I was getting into poker, and like there honestly was just insane degrees of like self-loathing and self-hatred and just like lack of self-acceptance. And the fact that poker was this catalyst for me to I cared so much about improving in this game and trying to become my best at it, that I couldn't overlook all of the things that were happening in me to cause many of the behaviors that was happening. So the fact that poker led to, which is not a lot of people's story, a lot of people leave poker like kind of jaded and like believing it's kind of toxic, but
or they stay for 30 years and feel jaded.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of
yeah. But I've met some of my best friends in poker, and I've met, and it really has been a huge catalyst for me. Like it's given me like a whole life that I didn't think would be possible. Like getting to work with people now and getting to work with some of it's just so rewarding. Like I honestly, like I love my work right now, and I love the journey that I went through, and the ability that I get to go through that journey and then take what I learned and give it to other people. And like the whole thing is just, I never would have guessed I would have gotten so much from poker, and none of it was financial, like all that I thought I was going to get was like, maybe if I get really good at this, I'll get money and fame or something, and the real thing that I got was like, I got friendship. I learned to accept and love myself, and I've gotten to work and have meaningful connections with like people from a coaching relationship. And like all of that is like some of the richest things you can get in life. And poker led me to all of it. So
that's great. That's great. So segueing a little bit to, I guess we'll call it the lightning round part of the podcast.
So I'm a long answerer. I don't know if I could do a lightning round. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's a loose label. What do you say is the most high impact action that you think players can take to improve their poker game?
Don't fold, bet, check, bet.
Hold down any pair plus.
Yeah.
And you'll learn that if you use stop and go as a bluff line for a month straight.
That was just the very first line that came to mind. I don't know if that's like a good answer, but that's the first thing that came to mind. Yeah.
Imagine there's a carbon copy of yourself that's getting into playing cards, right? As you started like learning, becoming obsessed with the game, if you could sit that copy down, give it some advice, what advice would that be?
I would say do whatever feels right and be open to learning.
Perfect. What's something you feel like people who are chasing their poker dreams don't spend enough time thinking about?
Why? Why are you doing this?
What do you think they spend too much time thinking about?
How do I make more money?
What's some common advice you hear that you disagree with?
That being a good poker player requires suppressing your emotions.
Can you expand on that a little bit? I know it's lightning round, but
yeah,
that's another thing that's very near and dear to my heart. That a lot of times it was from the general poker population. Like people should not know you're playing poker when you're playing poker. You should be a robot. You should be emotionless. Type of advice, which always struck me as just really, really, really bad advice.
Yeah, it's funny because it's really an internal thing, right? Like how someone looks is irrelevant because you have no idea what's going on inside of them. But what I will say is so I'll put this through a Buddhist lens because this is near and dear to my heart. But if you want to understand things, if you want to comprehend things, you have to be willing to get really near to experience. Okay? The way you get near to experience is a willingness to feel all that experience means to you. So equanimity is this quality in Buddhism you cultivate of learning to stay even-keeled in the midst of experience, to stay balanced and to not be off-balanced. And I think what people imagine when they see someone being a robot, what people try to find is this shortcut to being balanced. And in Buddhism, you have what's called near enemies of qualities. So equanimity is this really important quality to cultivate, like this willingness to feel all experience. And when you're willing to feel it, you don't need to change it. So you don't make behaviors to feel better. So you're not going to bluff because you don't like the way you're feeling. You're just willing to feel it all. The near enemy of equanimity is indifference, is this sort of distanced, shut down, I don't care kind of feeling. That can be cultivated, but what you've lost touch with is reality. The moment you shut yourself off from feeling, you've lost deep contact with the nature of reality. One of the things that, like, one of the images that is a metaphor I had a teacher use for how equanimity is you're pouring water into a bucket of sand, and the water gets like so deeply in the sand, it's not displacing the sand. So if I have a difficult feeling, I'm not trying to displace or get rid of. No, I'm trying to get deep in this feeling. And when you find this willingness to really go inward and like feel all of it, you'll realize that the same experience of people, it is as though it weren't there at all. Your behavioral implications from being willing to feel is the same as if the feeling wasn't there at all, your willingness to feel it. But what you gain is deeper understanding of yourself, deeper understanding of the situation, deeper understanding of your desires, why you're actually doing things. You gain so much more knowledge by being willing to feel experience as it comes to you. And you lose all of that when you suppress your emotions and suppress what you're experiencing. You lose all contact with reality as it is.
Man, that is... I love it. It's beautiful. If you could gift all poker players one book to read, what book?
Man, what book would I give people to read? I would give so many book recommendations, and I don't know if there's a through line. One book to read. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Suzuki Roshi.
And why?
Because it talks about approaching experience, but this can be true for poker. Like you're always a beginner, like this fresh new experience, right? It's just like taking everything as like a beginner and looking at it, and it really, that book is really the beginning of learning to cultivate this like equal balanced mind towards your experience. But it all starts with having a beginner's mind, like taking every hand like a beginner, just in invigorating that sense of being a beginner again and again and again and again.
Love it, man. If you could wave a magic wand change one thing about the poker world, what would it be?
Yeah, I would make us less focused on explicit logic. Like I would make the human experience a more important part of what it is to be a poker player.
And if you could put up a billboard, everybody's got to drive past on the way to the casino, what would your billboard say?
What would my billboard say? On the way to the casino? Just poker players or anyone going into a casino?
Just poker players. We'll say card room.
Wow, this is an interesting one. Let me think. If I could put up a billboard to show to any poker player. I don't know. I'm kind of a softie, so like part of me just wants to put up a billboard that says like everything's gonna be okay. Like,
Yeah,
I just want people.
very, very similar to Brian Rast's "Your Mother Doesn't Love You" billboard. Very.
Your mother doesn't love you.
Yeah, that was. He went the other way.
Yeah. The other way, yeah.
Well, before we shut down this, this round one of what's hopefully more conversations in the future, because it's a very rare thing, but I feel like I myself want to re-listen back to our episode so that I can just be more present, because I
appreciate it,
as anybody knows that's done interviews and podcasts, a lot of times you're trying to pay attention, you're trying to listen, you're trying to take everything in, and you're trying to keep the thread and not lose the thread, and it's a bunch of balls in the air that sometimes you lose sight of what's going on, or you lose focus. And this is one that I think is exceptionally valuable, and one that I'm going to listen back, and that's very, very rare thing. I don't think I may not have ever listened back to any of my podcasts.
Oh man,
so
I appreciate that so much.
And just two more questions before we call it. What's a project that you're working on that's near and dear to your heart?
I have my camera just died. Oh no.
Well, now you're going to have a project that's near and dear to your heart.
I'll say this with cameraless for the last little bit, but I have a 6-week course coming up. If you're interested in that, you can email me or join my Discord. My email is jared.alderman@gmail.com. The course is on presence in daily life, how to be more present in daily life, how to find like what is that like? How do we practice being more and more present? And it's going to be a 6-week kind of deep dive into just meditation practice and how to not draw this line between practice and life. Like just all life is practice.
Awesome, man.
And yeah.
Where can they learn more about you on the internet and learn more about this course? Do you have an email list, website?
Yeah, I'm working on an email list. I have a website, jaredalderman.com is my website. And then I'm on Instagram, jared.alderman. I'm on Twitter, I believe just Jared Alderman on Twitter. I have a Discord group that I do a lot through my Discord group. Maybe I can give you a link and you can have it underneath the video or something like that.
Perfect. Yep. We can drop it in the YouTube description.
In the YouTube, yep. And that's where I put out a lot of my information and honestly, where I release a lot of the groups and stuff that I'm doing is just within my Discord group. So
awesome, man. Well, check out Jared's Discord in the link in the description below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And it's been, brilliant time, man. I've loved it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson. Coach Brad approved. Are you a lone wolf searching for the ultimate pack? The CPG Wolf program is a close-knit brotherhood hell-bent on one thing only: chasing poker greatness. Powered by bleeding-edge wolf strats and led by Coach Brad and his lieutenants, CPG Wolves are systematically prepared for almost any spot they'll encounter on the green felt. If you want to plug into an elite team and have a step-by-step game plan to realize your full poker potential, you can apply at cpgwolves.com. Space is limited, and the pack is only as strong as its weakest member. So only the hungriest, grittiest, and most driven will be accepted into the program. Applications are open at cpgwolves.com.